And hello again. And since I've got my camera set up and since I've got it pointing in the right angle, I thought it would be sensible for us to attempt another video and another flip through video. I actually was going to flip through the Hobbit tarot deck, which I've recently acquired, but then I remembered I actually years and years ago was given the Lord of the Rings tarot deck and card game as a gift. And although I have to confess it's not my favourite tarot deck, it's not one that I've used to read with ever, and I'll explain why in a moment. I think there are some interesting things to say about these decks, and I thought it would be quite interesting to look at them in conjunction, since of course The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are both very connected. Not in the sense of the films. Lord of the Rings, both of the novels, or trio of novels in the case of Lord of the Rings, and individual novel in the case of The Hobbit, brilliant of course. Lord of the Rings films, brilliant. Hobbit films, terrible. So I do not approve of the Hobbit films. It should have just been perhaps one or maybe two films at the most, instead of being spun out to three. But I love the Lord of the Rings films, and I love the books of both of these. So I'll set aside my prejudices and we will look at the tarot cards in their own merit. So let's have a look and see what's in each box. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip through them together. And let's just have a look. Ooh, that's what I left behind. So what you get, oh dear, we're getting the cards all muddled up already and we haven't even begun. So in The Hobbit you get the beginning card, the introductory card. Both these decks, by the way, are by the same team, by the artist Peter Pokrawnik and Terry Donaldson, the author. Pretty good card stock in both cases. Reversible back here. Little white book. All good so far. Let's look at Lord of the Rings. This is actually not just a tarot deck. This one, and one of the reasons I haven't read with it, is advertised actually as a tarot deck and a game. And again, you get the little white book with various bits of information in, nothing too exciting there. And then you get an introductory card. Those are the card backs, again reversible, cardstock similar to The Hobbit. And you get the rules of the game. I have never tried to play this game and I probably never will. But there we are. If you want to play the game, you can play the game. So now on to the cards, and what I'm going to do is flip through fairly quickly. We'll look at each card in order in both decks, and if there's anything to say of interest, then I'll stop and I'll say it. And if you want to look more closely at these, please by all means just pause the video and we shall, I'm just trying to make sure you get a good view here. Pause the video and you can have a good look. So this card, obviously Bilbo. Interesting in this card that although the hero ostensibly of Lord of the Rings is Frodo, Bilbo's nephew, here we have the fool represented by Gollum. So this is about Bilbo's journey, and you could argue this is about Gollum's journey, and that kind of makes sense in the context of the books in some ways. The other thing to notice instantly is this card is simply named and numbered, and there's a picture. Very nice artwork, I think. And in this card, very nice artwork, much smaller because you have a border, this kind of brickwork border and the name. And you also have a kind of motif on each of the cards. Some words describing the card. Gollum, by a pool of water, considers the many possibilities open to him. Quite useful, I think, if you're new to tarot, and possibly slightly irritating if you're not, although it can prompt you about the scene in the book that this represents, whereas you'll find in the Hobbit deck some of the scenes, unless you're very familiar with the story, are not so obvious. So, moving on. The Magician, we have Gandalf in both cases, represented slightly differently in each one. The High Priestess. Now, I think it's interesting to pause here and comment that something that Tolkien is often, rightly I think, criticised for is a lack of strong female characters in his books. And of course, there are more female characters in the Lord of the Rings than there are in the Hobbit. So you'll find very little female characters in here, and when female cards appear, sometimes the representation is somewhat tenuous, as we're about to see. Whereas it's a bit easier for him, or for the deck creators of this deck. So here we have the High Priestess, and here we have the Empress. In the Hobbit, the Empress is represented by the mushroom, nature, I suppose, and nothing wrong with that. But of course, male characters appearing, dwarves and wizards and so on, but male dwarves and wizards appearing in this one. And here we have Belladonna Took, Galadriel and Rose Gamgee, exemplifying the three aspects of feminine power. So a slightly more satisfying Empress card there, I feel. Then we have the Emperor, possibly Elrond in both, certainly an elf in this one and Elrond in this one. The Hierophant, I believe, although when I paged through this originally, I thought this might be Saruman, but of course Saruman isn't in The Hobbit, the novel anyway. He does appear strangely in the film, but this is Gandalf. This is Gandalf in this card, and it is Saruman here. Saruman courts dark and secret forces. The Palantir has given him a vision of his own future glory. So something here about believing what you're told from on high, which is quite appropriate for the Hierophant, but of course gives a rather one-sided view of the Hierophant. That's a slight problem of both of these decks, that because the cards relate to particular characters, if you know these characters in the story to either be good characters or bad characters, you're given a very clear indication of what the deck creators are telling you for each of the cards. It doesn't leave a huge amount of room for interpretation. In both cases, strength is number 8. There's slightly more esoteric imagery in the Lord of the Rings deck. As you'll see, there's some references to Kabbalah. Here we have Beorn in The Hobbit and Tom Bombadil in Lord of the Rings for the Hermit. I like this Wheel of Fortune card. Relates to the finding of the ring and the riddle competition that Gollum and Bilbo have. And of course that is the turning point of the book, so it's quite appropriate there. And of course the Wheel of Fortune here is the ring itself. The ring brings benefits but eventually dominates. One ring to rule them all. Interesting. There we have Justice. Hangman is Gollum in Hobbit, and Faramir lowered onto the pyre. A man's life hangs in the balance in Lord of the Rings. This obviously is a scene from Lord of the Rings. I was about to tell you what happens, but then I thought, spoilers! Death. So, kind of generic looking death card in The Hobbit, and in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf confronts a Balrog. Gandalf loses his life but is to be reborn. Of course, that does happen in Lord of the Rings, and here we see the sign of Scorpio, we see the labyrinth, we see time. So, quite a lot of skulls, shells, eggs, kind of butterflies. There's lots of imagery in here. It goes a bit beyond just the storybook imagery. A goblin in Temperance, not quite sure how that works. And Sam and Frodo catch Gollum. The wise Frodo takes mercy on Gollum and allows him to live. So possibly representative of Temperance, but I think difficult. The devil is, of course, Smaug in The Hobbit, and here it's Wormtongue, the advice that poisons the good king, the mind of good King Theoden. Slightly unfortunately, I think, in The Hobbit, Smaug is also the tower, and which doesn't make for much differentiation between the tower and the devil in terms of imagery, which is unfortunate, I think. Orthanc under attack, appropriate. One of the two towers, of course, is the tower. Then we have a star. The artwork is, I think, really nice, and in the Hobbit deck, of course, you see it more clearly because it's larger. I think this deck would have worked really well with larger imagery and without this strange brickwork thing at the side. I don't really see what the point of that is, and it does detract somewhat. One of the reasons I haven't really read much with this deck. So I'm going to speed up a little bit now. Again, reminding you, you can pause if you want to have a closer look at any of these cards. Oh, smog again. Gets everywhere, that smog. Or is it smaug? I never quite know how to say it. I've always said it as smog. So that's the majors. Done. And, oh dear, that's some of the cards falling off my table. Not to worry, we shall press on. Ace of Wands, Two of Wands, Three of Wands, Four, these are still in frame. I've got a rather awkward tripod arrangement here, so I hope I'm not nudging the cards out of frame for you. Hopefully you can see them fairly clearly. Nice to see a warg appearing. I remember the wargs from the book very much. Eight of Wands, 9, 10 of Wands. We're getting close actually to the card in the Hobbit deck, which made me buy the deck, although I don't particularly like this deck. You might think, why on earth did you buy the Hobbit deck if you're not very fond of the Lord of the Rings deck, which you got first? Well, the reason quite simply is, it's really just because one of the cards in the deck that really appealed to me is one that we're about to see. And really I saw it and didn't realise that it was from the Hobbit Tarot. It's this one. I saw this online and thought I really like that. Ace of Cups. Where is it from? And it turned out to be from the Hobbit deck. And so I plumped it and bought it. So, really you kind of get the idea from what you've seen so far. So I'm going to press on and flip through the rest. If you're a fan of these books, then I think, you know, either one of these decks would be worth having, because you'll recognise what the scenes are from, what they represent, who the characters are, and you will see that some of them are really quite elegant representations of the cards. Others are a bit tenuous, but the artwork is pleasant and, you know, not a bad addition to anyone's collection. I prefer the artwork actually marginally in the Lord of the Rings deck as opposed to the Hobbit deck. I think it's more interesting. There are more characters, there are more scenes, but unfortunately the border is somewhat irritating. So we're into the swords now, of course. Slightly darker imagery. Of course, there are more characters in the case of the court cards, so we actually do get to see more representations of those cards, or different representations of those cards, and again more female characters. Although, of course, this wolf could be female. Who knows? And now we're on to the coins. Very nice ace of coins. Interesting here we have the ace of coins. Celeborn could almost be the king of coins or pentacles in a traditional deck. Much more kind of earthy tones. And in case of Lord of the Rings, much more homely scenes overall. Seven of coins and barrels. And here we can see the 9 of coins, 9 rings around the tree of life, so the Kabbalistic influence there. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. The pathways of life are open for those who can resist the traps of mortality. So overall, interesting, especially if you love Tolkien. It does work as a tarot deck, although some of the images I think in both are less intuitive than they could be. But an interesting curiosity. There we have it. The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings tarot decks. Back soon.